Welcome back to Energy Transition Today, an Inspiration podcast. My name is Leonard, and in this episode, my colleague Maya sits down with Jakub Fedorowicz, head of M&A at R.Power Renewables, one of Poland's leading independent power producers. R.Power Renewables started out as a solar developer, but has since evolved into a full-fledged IPP with a growing focus on battery storage, onshore wind, and hybrid projects across Europe. Jakub takes us through that journey, from the company's transition to an IPP model to how it's navigating Poland's regulatory shifts, grid bottlenecks, and investor appetite for battery storage. It's an interesting look into how one of the most active developers in Central Europe is positioning itself for the next wave of renewable growth, and why Poland might just be the most exciting battery storage market in Europe right now. This conversation was recorded on the site of our yearly Energy Storage Summit Europe in Munich, hosted at the iconic Allianz Arena. If that sounds like your kind of event, no worries. We'll be back next year and you can find more details in the show notes. But now, I hope you enjoy the episode.
Jakub, R.Power, as an IPP based in Poland, do you mind taking us through what the company does, where you're present, and what asset classes you operate in?
Yes, of course, Maya, and thank you for having me in this discussion. As R.Power, we are, as you mentioned, we are an IPP. We are actually a multi-technology IPP, headquartered in Poland. Initially, the company had a different business model. It was develop, build, and sell. And then we transitioned converted into an IPP. And our current business model is to develop, build, and hold.
Yeah.
However, we also have our asset rotation program.
Yeah.
So we divest some of the assets to simply recycle cash and then reinvest in our IPP platform.
Is there a criteria for which ones you decide to hold on to and the ones you sell on, or is it just about the opportunity?
No, it's actually, obviously we try to sell assets that are marketable.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that these are assets that we can, deliver. We typically divest the assets at RTB on RTB basis or RTB plus construction services. There are certain selection criteria that we do, and there are different things that we consider actually during this selection process.
It's interesting, the transition to an IPP. We're kind of seeing quite a bit of that. What made R.Power decide to make that jump?
Yeah, so that happened actually before we decided to do an equity round.
Okay.
Because R.Power has sold a minority stake to Amber Infrastructure, to actually Free Sea Fund managed by Amber Infrastructure, and EBRD. That was in 2023.
Yeah.
The company still the founders of the company still hold 70% of the equity interest. But that was the main trigger to actually transition to IPP and then to build scale even faster with our minority shareholders on board.
That's so you have the investors that gave you the confidence to make the transition. And will the founders hold on to the majority stake, or would you be open to more equity investors in the future?
Yes, I mean, there are, as I mentioned, currently the founders hold 70%, and there are various strategies that we consider long-term, but I would prefer not to comment on this strategy in more detail.
That's me trying to angle for a news story, but hey. So let's talk about the asset classes, the main topic we're here in Munich to discuss. In starting off with Poland, because you're based in Poland, what is the current market for different, let's solar and onshore wind? Let's start with solar and onshore wind. What is the development environment for these two asset classes in Poland?
In terms of PV, thinking about the market, I think it's important to understand what kind of market size we are speaking about and what the future holds for this market and what are the forecasts, right? So currently we have, in Poland specifically, we have 11 gigawatts of onshore wind in the system, and then 22 gigawatts of PV projects in the system, out of which approximately 50% is behind the meter and 50% is front of the meter.
Yeah.
And if we look at the forecasts in 2035, these numbers will double both for onshore wind and PV.
Onshore wind?
Yes, both for onshore wind and PV, and there is actually a rationale for this that I'll deep dive into this a bit later. But for example, for PV specifically, this still remains like a main driver of the renewables deployment in Poland specifically, and this is because there have been plenty of projects developed so far that are at various stages of development.
Yeah.
There are a lot of grid connection conditions issued, but this will not necessarily translate into constructed assets, right?
Yeah.
So obviously some of these assets will vanish in the meantime. However, PV still remains a main kind of driving horse of the renewables in Poland, and this is because it's very fast to develop those assets, right?
Yeah.
For onshore wind, for example, it's not. It takes much longer, right? Like a typical time frame for development of wind assets is between 4 to 7 years. And then you take around 1 to 2 years to construct those assets, right? So the development period, including construction,
is very long.
Yeah, it's very long, right? And then, as you mentioned, there have been some regulatory changes recently pertaining to onshore wind in Poland. And
the 10H rule.
Yeah, the 10H rule, right? And so the 10H rule, basically, just to simply brief everybody, the 10H rule was introduced to make sure that the onshore wind is constructed not closer than 10 times the tip height of the wind turbine, which is, assuming a tip height of roughly 200 meters, we are saying that there has to be like 2 kilometer distance between any surrounding buildings and the turbine, which is obviously like a very long distance, and Poland is quite an urbanized country, so there are a lot of buildings everywhere, even in the villages, right? So that has limited the available area for onshore wind development, and caused some headaches and slowdown in the economy. However, that especially when it comes to onshore wind technology, right? However, that has changed around 2 years ago, when the 700-meter rule was kind of introduced, and that means that the 10H rule still remains in place, but the municipalities have the right to waive this 10H rule. And to decrease it to 700 meters, and that actually is sufficient for the time being for the investors. And that also, like, obviously the idea was to limit it to 500, and probably
that's the European standard, is the 500.
Yes, and that's the European standard. However, that was rejected by the president. So thinking of the bill, there is nothing much going on currently pertaining to this specific, regulation for onshore wind. However, I would say that 700 meters already opens plenty of opportunities in Poland to develop onshore wind. And based on the 700-meter rule, you still can manage to develop a lot of onshore wind in Poland. Obviously, the goal, it's not ideal, but investors sort of accepted it to some extent, I would say. Obviously, there are still discussions and pressure being put in on the political party. But I think it's also the political party doesn't help that much because there are different, I would say, politicians, different grades of politicians from the power base that have that are actually sending a very negative messages for onshore wind to the public opinion, and I don't want to deep dive into details of this, but obviously everybody has different interests, right, in this, and
So, but as a developer, you're saying that the 700-meter rule is just enough for you to progress that pipeline or even double the capacity, installed capacity?
Yes, I would say so. 10H rule was really drastic for development of onshore wind because, as I mentioned, there was almost no land available. But the 700 meter that actually opens the possibility for onshore wind developers, and this land area that is available for onshore wind developers has increased to a few percent of land available in the country, right? As I mentioned, this is not ideal, but I think a lot of developers and investors have positioned for this sort of scenario already a couple of years ago, and there are already some projects that have progressed in development based on this 700-meter rule some time ago, and they are already kind of mid-stage of development. So I would say that this should open the room for us to double the capacity over the next years.
So as a developer,
over the next 10 years, apologies.
Next 10 years, okay.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, as a developer who is based in Poland, who's probably got boots on the ground, would this give you an advantage over, let's say, foreign investors or developers coming in to develop projects? Because you would know the local regulations better. Would that give you a advantage over the permitting process for onshore wind?
Yes, I mean, speaking of Poland, we have been in the market for 12 years now. As I mentioned, initially the company was focusing on PV, but as an organization, we have 285 employees, right? We are present across 6 countries, and this is Poland, Portugal, Spain, Germany, Italy, and Romania. And out of these 285 employees, 180 is located in Poland. So we have around 100 specialists working in across development, engineering, procurement department, construction departments, that support the development of the projects. So obviously this gives us the edge over the competition, but we don't really fear competition that much, because competition is very good in all the markets, right? That drives the economy, and that drives the progress actually worldwide. That's what I think.
On November 26th, we at Inspiration will be hosting our 2025 European Energy Transition Awards at the Pan Pacific Hotel here in London. Now in its 4th year, the awards are an opportunity to celebrate the organisations and individuals paving the way for our net zero future, awarding the lenders, developers and legal, financial and technical advisors for their successes across the European market. We'd love to have you along. Join us on the 26th, either through our event page at inspiratia.com or by emailing the team at conferences@inspiratia.com.
So let's move on to the meat of the discussion for today, which is BESS. And you've said that battery storage is increasingly becoming core to your portfolio. Is that specific to certain countries, or is it across the board, across the 6 countries you're currently operating?
As the company, we have roughly 1.1 gigawatts of projects that have been either constructed or are currently under construction. And this is mainly PV for the time being.
Okay, yeah.
However, we have 11 gigawatt pipeline of grid secured assets.
Grid secured assets?
Yes, grid secured assets across those 6 markets. And roughly 40% of this is in BESS, right? The remaining capacity is in PV or onshore wind. So BESS has become like a really, I would say, a prevailing technology in our portfolio, and we have like a global strategy to actually develop both standalone BESS across all our markets, but also a hybrid BESS, pooling BESS together with PV project, together with onshore wind, and all 3 technologies combined, right? So there are, for example, in Poland specifically, there are certain rules, for example, cable pooling that allows hybridization of one grid connection point by adding the other technologies using the same grid access, right? So we are trying to take advantage of this, and hybridization is part of our core strategy as well.
Hybrid. That's quite interesting, because another developer I was speaking to, who currently only focuses on standalone, he identified this as an issue with co-location. So if you don't have your own asset, coming to that agreement with owner of the generation asset can be tricky for co-location. So it's only feasible if you own the generation asset or have certain degree of control of the generation asset. But you have a long line of PV projects that you can hybridize. There is a pipeline
Correct.
already available.
Correct. So that's exactly the idea. By hybridization, I actually meant, utilizing the grid connection, grid connection points and grid connection access that we have been granted for our PV projects, and adding our best to this existing projects, right?
Okay.
I totally agree. I mean, if there was a grid connection point to which we would like to connect BESS, but we would not be the owner of the asset generating unit, then obviously it all comes down to some sort of commercial agreement between the parties, and then also, it requires it requires some flexibility on both sides, but also a lot of work on the regulatory aspects and legal aspects of such agreement, right?
So, again, coming back to Poland for a minute, for grid access, would it be accurate to say that co-locating or hybridizing an asset would be much simpler in theory than getting a connection for a standalone asset, like let's say BESS?
Yes, I mean that was the main rationale actually behind implementing this sort of regulation in force. Because in Poland specifically, actually, grid connection has always been, for multiple years now, the main bottleneck, right? Because
literally, I was talking to a German developer, and he says the same thing.
Yeah, and I think it is applicable for majority of European countries, and this is because the grid has been congested in plenty of for many years now, and that has caused a very high rejection rate when the companies were applying for grid connection access, right? So, for example, in Poland, the grid connection rejection rate is actually around 98%, right? While in case of cable pulling and utilizing the same grid connection point to connect the different technologies. I mean, it is allowed by the law, so it shouldn't be very difficult.
That's an interesting point you bring up. So 98% rejection rate. So would this, in theory, reduce the risk of what we call zombie projects? So developers like trying their luck. Some developers will say, like, if you have a plot of land, you can technically put a solar plant or a battery on there. How hard can it be? And these people applying for grid connection points, without having a proper business case or financing to do it, creates this long queues of projects that sort of take away from the real developers or developers with the track record and the capabilities to do these projects. So having a rejection rate this high, would it, in theory, be actually productive?
Yes. I mean, who am I to speak about productivity,
in theory,
right? In the end of the day, I understand that PSC, which is our Polish TSO, is working on some measures to actually get rid of what you call zombie projects, right? And I understand that there will be some regulations in place that will be putting kind of pressure on developers to advance the development of their projects once the grid connection access is granted. However, the issue that you mentioned about application process and like a very high rejection rate, I think that will unfortunately remain with us, and this is because that's how this law been structured. So anybody that, for example, in best case has been granted, has secured the land, can apply for the grid connection conditions. And this in theory is actually limited by the grid connection advance payment that everybody has to pay when submitting the application for the grid connection conditions, right? Which is
how much is that?
This is in Poland. In Poland, this is 30,000 zlotych per megawatt, which is 7,000 euro per megawatt, and it's capped at 3 million zlotych, which is 700,000 euro, right? So for large projects, I mean, not everybody can do that, and smaller developers, or as you mentioned, somebody who has a piece of land but doesn't have the financing, will not necessarily do
Have
that,
the-
right? So
yeah.
there are already some preventive measures to avoid excessive grid applications, but there are still a lot of them. And that's the reality that we live in, and probably will live in for foreseeable future.
So what do you think would have to change in the regulatory framework to actually clear the bottleneck and see these projects are delivered in a more timely fashion? As a developer, what would you like to see happen?
Yes, for sure we would need some measures and some regulatory easing that would allow us to develop projects quicker, right? There are a lot of administrative procedures when developing the projects that we have to undertake. So obviously simplifications of some of those procedures would be very beneficial, because we could shorten the development timelines for all BESS, PV and wind by probably year 2 or 3 if we were to do it efficiently. And by efficiently I mean perhaps some digitalization would help. That would take a lot of work off some employees' shoulders that have to currently do a lot of work manually, right?
So
not all manual, but there is a lot of work that has to be done by employees, and there is quite limited automation in the whole permitting process.
Poland increasingly has been seen as the next big target market for rollout of BESS projects. There's a lot of interest in the country, not just for BESS, but for other asset classes as well. Are the conditions right for foreign investment for BESS in Poland?
Yes, indeed. And I think actually Poland, I will be a little bit biased saying that, because we are headquartered in Poland and Poland is our core market. But I would say that Poland is by far currently the best market in Europe in terms of BESS investments. And this is because, when thinking of BESS, we should, there are a couple of things to consider. First of all, we have quite supporting regulatory framework in place that allows pretty quick development of BESS. Because there are certain rules that allow us to do development of BESS quicker than, for example, even PV projects that are already being developed, not that slow.
This is the permitting process or just the build out?
Yeah, that's the permitting process, and so that's the first point. So the permitting process is quite straightforward, I would say, in Poland. And then the second thing is about the revenue streams that are available in the market. So the revenue streams that are available in Poland for BESS are quite similar to those available in other more mature markets. Meaning, in Poland we have we can do energy arbitrage, energy trading. We have system services, and also we have a very qualitative capacity market, which is which has been available for BESS market for BESS technology in 2022, 3 and 4 at very attractive derating factors. Meaning you could secure a capacity market contract for a 17-year period at a very nice rate, which would give you approximately 30% of contracted revenues just from this stream itself.
That would be attractive to debt providers.
Yes, and that is very attractive to the debt providers. And so taking this into account and considering that there is also, I would say that the market has progressed quite much over the last year or two, and there has been a lot of education done across all the boards. I would say, with the off-takers, there have been a lot of discussions between various parties and the off-takers. And off-takers have started to understand the market, started to feel confident about the market. The same is with the lenders, 2 years ago, the market was almost non-existent. It still is non-existent in terms of the installed capacity. But at least the educational part has been done. and there was a lot of and there's a lot of interest coming from off-takers and lenders and confidence in this market, right? So I would say, I think what's important to stress is, why did I say that? In my view, Poland is the best market in Europe for best investments.
Yeah.
This is mainly because you can have a fairly hedged business case in place with this capacity market payment, and then offtake based on some tolling or floor structures that would give you 60, 70, or even 100% hedged revenue with the IRRs, equity IRRs ranging from 20 to 35%, depending depending on what kind of route to market structure you choose and what kind of gearing assumptions you make, right? But based on our knowledge, this is feasible.
So the sector's primed for growth. To end on, again, another topic that's not. It's not very clear how this will progress, but increasingly there's a lot of push towards nearshoring. So we talk a lot about regulation, but supply chain also has a major part to play in the build out of BRES. I mean, you would know better, but with the European directives and also wider international directives coming from the US to nearshore, procure materials from closer to home, which would, we don't know how possible it is at the scale for the build out, but also that would increase the capex of projects. Is that a consideration for developers when you pursue vast pipelines?
I mean, we haven't been facing these issues so far in terms of the projects that we develop, and this is because nearshoring is usually pertaining to some subsidies that are being granted. For the projects, right? So if there are no subsidies, there are no certain
BES is mostly
no limitations in terms of supply chain. So we don't see it particularly as an issue for the time being.
Do you have any projects coming to maturity before the end of this year? I know we've barely a month left, but any coming to RTB or even financing?
Yes, indeed we do. Actually, we have two BES projects. One BES project in Romania. It's at 127 megawatts, 254 megawatt hours. That should, the construction should commence within the next 2 months, more or less.
Okay.
And we will construct it together with our partners, Eiffel Investment Group. We just announced a couple of days ago that we sold minority stake to them, and we will, co-construct this asset together.
Yeah. Now, we covered the news. Is that the financing plan, or would you have project finance debt, let's say, to fund some of the cost?
Yes. But I mean, our strategy is to actually do some sort of offtake structures and project finance for all our assets, and we have a global strategy for that. The same applies in this particular case. We'll do the project finance, and then we have another asset in Poland. It's 150 megawatts, 300 megawatt hours, that also will go to construction within the next 2-3 months. And we are in the final stages of negotiations of the PPA and the financing.
So I definitely have cause to bother you again in a couple of weeks for the details on the financing. I will be doing that, but Jakub, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much.